I have played a lot of games in my life, but indie games are different, specifically those made in RPGMaker. For those who don't know, RPGMaker is a software meant for making, well, RPGs, but with a little bit of ingenuity, the engine can be pushed to its limits and devs can create great games of any genre. RPGMaker has been around for almost 30 years. And I think what draws people to these engines is the fact that they are very easy to work in. The engine's tagline, powerful enough for a developer, simple enough for a child, is 100% true, and this fact is a bit of a double-edged sword for not only the engine, but for aspiring devs who choose to work in it. If you were to go onto any game marketplace, you would find thousands of shovelware products. Thousands of games with very little effort put in trying to make a quick buck, and unfortunately a good amount of these games are made in one of these engines. I feel like this causes a rift where some people are cognizant of the potential and the rich history of this engine, and on the other side people write RPGMaker off as a shovelware factory. And I can't really blame them. If you look through the RPGMaker Steam tag and the first game you saw was Karen's Prison, then yeah, you probably would be turned off immediately unless obvious porn games are your thing, like these other guys. Another common criticism I hear of RPGMaker is that all the games feel the same, which really is only true if you barely scratch the surface of what these engines have to offer. A lot of RPGMaker devs get a little overzealous and put together a game using the assets that come with the software, which actually isn't that big of a deal in itself, but it becomes an issue when you find a bunch of games on Steam, itch.io, and GameJolt that all look exactly the same from first glance. This isn't a problem with the developers really, I feel it's just what happens when you make something this accessible. Now me, I am an RPGMaker dev through and through. Even though I've only put together one product, I have thousands of hours across these engines. I started with RPGMaker 3 on the PS3. I don't know if anyone's played that one. It's really hard to find anybody who knows what I'm talking about. But what made this one different is that it's in 3D. The point is, I love these games, and while I've been very critical of them on my channel in the past, I would like to start up a new series where I find some hidden gems that wouldn't normally get the light of day because they were made in RPGMaker. Warning, I am still a game critic, so I will still be offering my opinions on these games, not because I think I'm some sort of RPGMaker savior, just because I like talking about things, especially things I'm passionate about. That being said, I know some people aren't really interested in what critics have to say, so there will be timestamps in the description that'll take you directly to my final thoughts, pros and cons, all that stuff. Slight spoilers for the game showcase, and if you're new around here, hi, my name is Delta and I make videos talking about things, mostly games. If I held your attention this long, consider dropping a like. Come on, it's free. Or you can drop a dislike, also free, but I mean, come on, leaving a like could be your good deed for the day. Also, I heard liking my vids puts a few extra inches on your pee-pee, but you ain't hear that from me. So between you and me, I have a bit of a history with this one. If you know, you know, and if you don't, then I guess you don't. I played Legends of Astravia a few years ago, and man, the demo that just released on Valentine's Day is a huge step up in quality. Legend of Astravia is a turn-based JRPG where you follow Oliver. Not much is known about Oliver at this point, but it's fine. This is only a demo and the poor bastard has amnesia. The game's sprite work is gorgeous. It feels like the game is hiding the fact it was made in RPGMaker while at the same time paying homage to... Is it homage? Or homage? Hey Siri, how do you pronounce homage?
Whose contact info are you looking for?
Bitch. Oh, it is homage, okay. While at the same time paying homage to RPGMaker. I might be crazy for thinking that, but the overworld sprites of Oliver and our party member Azel reminds me of some of the character assets that come with RPGMaker. I can't remember if it's VX, AIS, or XP. I don't know. I actually like this a lot as someone who likes the default assets that come with these engines. The game also does a cool thing where it contextualizes saving in its lore. I love when games do this. Keep doing this in games. It's fucking sick. Why stop at saving? Contextualize loading if you can. Leveling up. Well, leveling up in XP is already pretty much contextualized implicitly in games that have it, but yeah, contextualize your game's mechanics. It's just chef's kiss. During one of the cutscenes between our two characters, Oliver claims he doesn't know any magic, except when you get in battle, you have access to the breeze skill, which to my understanding is a magic ability. Azel can do it too. This made me a little skeptical of Oliver. Was he lying? I don't know. I'm unsure if this was intentional, so I wouldn't necessarily say it's a bad thing. It seems Azel already knows about Oliver's magic ability, so there's no point lying about about it to him, but I don't know. I made note of it to see if the demo would bring it up again later, but it didn't. The game also showed me button prompts for a controller, even though when I launched it, I didn't have a controller plugged in. This made my first combat encounter a bit rough. I guess I was expecting the controls to change to just keyboard, but it's fine. I plugged my Xbox controller in and had no problem after. I actually enjoyed my time with this demo. For the most part, it took me about an hour to finish, which I think is a good length for a JRPG demo. However, there were some parts where I was unsure whether something was a bug or a feature. I was able to pick up some items through walls, not all the time, but some of the time. There was a hole in the staircase in a cutscene, and then after the cutscene, it was normal. The arcane arts animation was a different FPS than the rest of the skills. These are all minor issues that might have slipped through the cracks, but it's interesting to me because the rest of the game is very polished. The systems introduced seemed well thought out. The puzzles were box puzzles, but that's okay when it's used in a tutorial area. I don't think they'll be relied on in later dungeons. Also, since movement is handled differently in this game compared to other RPG Maker games, I was kinda able to cheese the box puzzles. Using my wider collision box, I was able to position myself in ways that allowed me to move the boxes from unorthodox angles. If this is intentional, that's super cool and could potentially add an extra layer of depth to usually bland box puzzles. If this wasn't intentional, then it should be. I felt smart. All in all, I really enjoyed my time here. I only have one real complaint. Well, two, but only one is really important. Not a fan of the music choices. The battle theme and swamp music just really didn't do it for me. Most people probably wouldn't care that much, but I'm a musician and game music is very important to me, so it stood out like a sore thumb. The music is not bad by any means, just a bit underwhelming in my opinion. Nothing really got me, shucking and jiving. The other complaint was the final boss of this dungeon. The boss felt cheap and unfinished. Some of its attacks had no sound effects. During the boss fight, I used an AoE heal with Azo, but for some reason, Oliver was able to evade my heal. Don't know if that's intentional, and if it is, why? Also, during the fight, I suddenly wasn't able to use any items with Oliver, and while I was spamming my Y button to use an item, the boss queued up a spell that finished off Oliver and gave me a game over. On my way to try again, I noticed that during the cutscene before the fight, the ground cracks around Azel and Oliver, and that also didn't have a sound effect. Not sure if it just didn't play. I know sometimes RPG Maker is finicky with sound effects, but yeah, that also happened. This was disappointing because I believe a demo is your first impression, and I was a bit disappointed when I died to the boss in a way that wasn't my fault. The second time, the boss fight went smoothly and I was able to finish the demo without any problems, but man, I was a bit irritated from my first attempt. I was having so much fun and kind of building up to this big moment with the boss just for, those things to happen. When it comes to Legend of Astravia, I give it a 7 out of 10 on the hype scale. I'm very excited for the full release, and I intend to give it a full review when it releases in its entirety. Now, normally this series will only cover games that aren't finished yet, but I was recommended Slimes while doing research, so fuck it, here it is. Slimes left me conflicted. I feel overall I like this game, but I definitely got some issues with it. First, let's talk about what Slime does right. Slimes is a turn-based RPG where you play as Julius, a man on a righteous crusade to destroy demons and slimes. He is joined in this crusade by a man who we'll refer to as Healer. The game itself is a dungeon crawler. The whole game takes place in this one location. Very simple premise, but the thing I find most interesting here is the dynamic of Julius and Healer. These two hate each other, like really hate each other, and I think that that's an interesting dynamic to explore in a video game. They don't go from enemies to lovers or enemies to friends. No, they hate each other the whole time, and their hate burns ever brighter as you continue to play through this game. You learn more about these characters throughout the game, and while playing, you may even find yourself picking sides in their conflict. I know I did. This sort of narrative is very interesting to me, and it feels unique in the never-ending sea of RPG and JRPG games that really buy into the RPG and JRPG tropes. While this dynamic is interesting, I found that the writing was the only thing that pushed me to play this game. That really isn't a bad thing when you really think about it, but when you're making a game, especially an RPG, I feel like every pillar should work in tandem to craft an enjoyable experience. And the combat in this game wasn't enjoyable in the slightest. There were some interesting things present though. The ammo system and the way some buffs affected your party negatively reminded me a lot of The Darkest Dungeon. Funny enough, I think I prefer the ideas here more so than I did in Darkest Dungeon, because here I chose to inflict the debuffs to myself and trade off for other rewards, where in Darkest Dungeon, sometimes the game can just fuck with me because RNG says it's time to fuck with me. That being said though, the combat here feels anything but balanced. I know the game has difficulty options, but it's a bit obscure. The game did ask me if I wanted things to be easy, but I felt that wasn't the way the game was intended to be played. I didn't mess around with easy mode, so I don't know how it compares, but I wouldn't call the other mode hard. I would call it unlucky mode. I played this game for about 3.5 hours, and the enemy didn't start missing me with attacks until the last hour I played. Again, this isn't too big of an issue by itself, but the problems come in when I'm very inaccurate throughout my entire playthrough. I emptied full magazines into enemies just for them to evade, miss, evade, miss, evade, miss. Oh, you hit them that time, but too bad, no damage, evade, miss, evade, miss, evade. I understand that guns can be very inaccurate, that's why we have things like scopes, but fuck, dude. Julius was a gunsmith. If my memory serves me right, he should be very familiar with shooting, and I would assume he would be a competent shot as well, but man, this hit rate is abysmal. The combat also has a mechanic where if the fights take too long, the slimes get more and more frustrated, causing them to deal more damage and take less damage. This is a cool idea in a vacuum, but it leads to more frustration on the player's end because they spend a good portion of these fights dealing 0 damage. I'm going off script here. This actually, now that I think about it, this actually might have been intended because it seemed like the game was already trying to like let us know like, hey, the slimes and the humans, maybe they aren't so different after all. But if that's was intended, I feel I don't know if I like that. I don't know if I like that. Anyway, this is a cool idea in a vacuum, but it leads to more frustration on the player's end because they spend a good portion of these fights dealing 0 damage. There are skills that guarantee hits, but they usually aren't worth it in my opinion. I found myself defaulting to the machine gun and bullet spray ability because it dealt damage multiple times to all enemies. It still missed very frequently, but since it dealt damage 4 times per enemy, I had 4 opportunities to hit them. In fights with multiple enemies, this made sure that I almost always had some kind of DPS, while I just had healer spam heal me or use his ability that guaranteed a good hit. The combat had promise, but the low accuracy of the party made it feel like a chore, which really sucks because the reward for killing every enemy on each floor is lore bits that further flesh out the game's world, and the writing is amazing here. I was completely enthralled with this apocalypse and how the government was choosing to fight it. The politics were interesting. The side scenarios provided extra context, which gave the core gameplay loop meaning and weight. But once I reached floors 9 and 10, I found myself burnt out on the combat. I just wanted to see where the story was taking me. My party leveled up, but it feels like the slimes just leveled with me, so the combat difficulty stayed the same throughout the entire game. My optimal strategy of buff Julius, debuff healer, bullet spray, reload continued to work, and my issue with combat just became boredom. Healer never received a revive ability, so I found myself backtracking to the safe spots littered throughout the dungeon for a full heal between every fight, because if Julius died, then that's a game over. I had to sit and just wait for the slimes to kill me so I can restart. Playing this game, I found myself missing some RPG elements that I usually take for granted, like equipment and recovery items. I played all the way to one of the in-game boss fights, which I won't spoil because despite my issues with the game, I still recommend it and implore you to play it yourself. But once I made it to the boss fight, it has a little cutscene that you have to play through before you actually get to the fight, and as soon as I finished the cutscene, the game crashed on me. Luckily, I saved quite frequently, so no biggie. I just relaunched the game, it's fine. This fight, however, was definitely a spike in difficulty, and I had to change my strategy. I failed over and over and over again, mostly because Julius would die and I had no way of reviving him. So then I would just frown and spam the confirm button, waiting for healer to die just for me to spam my way through the cutscene 3, 4, 5 more times just to get another shot at the fight. The fight was tough, and it wasn't because I was under-leveled. I literally killed every single enemy on the way to them. So after my 6th time dying, I just turned the game off, and here we are. I didn't talk about the game's visuals because it's obvious they aren't very good, but they serve their purpose of establishing atmosphere. Rewatching the game's footage, I don't think I would change them too much, maybe spruce them up a little bit so it wasn't literal stick figures, but I love the minimalistic color palette and what the developer did with the tools available to them. I will always applaud that. I know I just said a lot of bad things about this game, but I still came out on the other side liking it. I do plan to go back and finish it, but with time constraints, I just decided to stop and just make a note of what I've played thus far. Normally I wouldn't do that, but I'm pretty sure I was at the end, so I think it's okay for the most part. If you can make it through the poorly balanced combat and ugly visuals, there's a wonderful story here. Fuck my rating, play it for yourself. Psst, I rated a 6.5 out of 10. Trailblazer is a ride. Out of all the games to showcase this week, this one definitely looks like an RPGMaker game, but there is nothing wrong with that. Trailblazer is a hilarious Western RPG. Get it? Because it's a cowboy game and takes a bunch of tropes from old Western films, even the slightly racist ones. This game has RPGMaker all over it, and I think it's the easiest to recommend. Every RPGMaker dev who sees this video should give this demo a try, because honestly, I think it just shows how creative you can be with the base assets of the engine. There are some unique tilesets here, but all of the character images are generated in engine. While they don't look the best, they still serve their purpose. The writing in this game, though, is amazing. The developer really understood the assignment. The writing, the graphics, the music, and the characters all come together nicely to scratch that cowboy itch. I have never played an RPGMaker game like this one, and it shows you can still stand out and still use the default assets that come with your engine. Honestly, I think this should have been one of those games showcased on the engine Steam page, but that's just me. The combat is also good. The systems are wonderfully taught to the player, and the game gives the player just enough options to incentivize multiple playthroughs. Being able to customize the protagonist to fit your playstyle is always going to be a thumbs up in my book, and the combat has just enough depth to keep it from growing stale. Again, I really recommend this demo, and I'm very excited to see where it goes in the full release. Also, the fucking duel mechanic is so interesting to me. I don't know, man. I just want to know how they made that in RPGMaker. I know how they made it. They made it with fucking programming, but like, come on, man. That shit was cool. I like it. 10 out of 10. Alrighty, Magical Deathpair is my gem of the week, with a little asterisk next to it. This game is perfect to me. It's perfect in every single way because it felt like it was tailored for me. I like stuff like this. I love stuff like this. In this game, 6 witches, 8 couples play in a game to escape death. Hunt down the imposter, save the world from impending catastrophe. Life and death adventure game for those who love charming witches. I took that straight from the Steam page. If you like social deduction games like Among Us, Clue, Danganronpa, Zero Escape, AI Somnium Files, and Your Turn to Die, you will love this game. Trigger warnings though. This game does have some gore in it, and this chapter also has what I thought was a rape scene, but it was actually a BDSM sex scene. There's no nudity, of course, it's just some heavy innuendo, but I still felt the need to share that. Hi, Off-Script Delta again. Rereading the Steam page, the 8 couples part just went right over my head because in playing the game, I didn't get the vibe that the pairs were dating each other. So I don't know if that's just a translation error, but yeah, who knows? Actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, that rape scene that I thought that actually might have still been a rape scene. I don't know. This game is breathtaking. It is full of good art and music. All of the characters are likable, and the story is wonderfully paced. By the end of the demo, I was looking like a fucking conspiracy theorist with all of my notes trying to figure out who was what, and who could do what, and who was fucking who. These games are some of my favorite type of games, and I understand that they might not be for everybody, but I recommend everybody to go and check out Magical Deathpair. 11 out of 10, very excited. We'll definitely be covering it when the game is finished. Just let me buy it, Yatsunagi. Please, just ship it over. Just ship it over. Just mail it. Fuck. Oh, yikes. This video ended up longer than I expected. I wasn't expecting to have so much to say about Astravia and slimes, but please understand the point of this series isn't to whine about RPGMaker games. It's to showcase some that stood out to me. The fact that I had so much to say about these titles kind of shows that there's substance. There's something to talk about. All of these games are great in their own way, and my goal is to maybe get them in front of people who normally wouldn't give them a chance. There is so much talent in this community, and I hope I was able to shine some light on it today. Until next week, my name is Delta, and this was Hidden Gems. You still there? Thanks for making it to the very, very end of my video. Did you like it? Drop a like. Did you love it? Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss other videos like this one. Do you have something to add to the discussion? Leave a comment. Tell me about some other great RPG Maker games, or maybe share your thoughts if you played some of the games I talked about today. Or don't do any of this. I'm just a voice emanating from your device's sound card. Who am I to tell you what to do? Fuck it.